Hey y'all, it is Ken, and we are climbing the labyrinth. This is episode number 3, and we're going to jump into maybe a little bit of controversy, but not really. I mean, to be a Christian is to be living within the world, although not a part of this world in some sense. Trying to reclaim it. I think this is a side tangent. This is just a thought right away. The thought that we live in hopes of heaven someday basically tells us that we should live towards some sort of hopeful escapism sort of deal. And the reality is Genesis says, this is your home and you should take care of it. And so by taking care of it, we live within this world that is fallen, but we are trying to claim the kingdom where God has already staked his ownership and his reign. And so we root through the beautiful mess. That's a Rick McKinley book, great book, The Beautiful Mess, and claim back the kingdom from the world. And that's the hope for the end and the restoration of all things in Revelation. But some of that means that we have to talk about political things. And so today we're going to talk about some executive orders within the White House. And this could be maybe slightly polarizing for some people, but I want to approach it from not necessarily the specifics of the content in its whole, but what I would consider just the carnival that is what is going on right now. And what I mean by carnival is think more maybe like the greatest showman. This is the greatest showman of the United States. And I don't mean that for President Biden. Pray for him and the administration as they navigate the waters of the things going on now, but more so in just the way that things are being approached and the logic involved is kind of boggling sometimes. And so he has come out with a number of executive orders, and not to comment one way or another on that. I mean, he's the president; he's allowed to do that. And so, but what I want to do is go through and kind of break down a few of these. And so some of it is. The first one is combating discrimination on gender identity and sexual orientation, and then another one is all qualified Americans allowed to serve in the military, and then you move into the 48th anniversary of Roe versus Wade and the codification that they're looking at there, and then one of the most recent ones was restoring trust in the government through science. And so we're just going to poke at like how all of these things fit together, but do not fit together. I mean, it's literally science is only science when you call it that, and when the government calls it that. And then towards the end, then I'll wrap it all together, because the reality is some of these things you can go, well, I disagree or I agree, but then the point is where does this line up with our faith? How does this affect who we are as God's children and our growth in that? How does that affect who we are as a church? So let's jump in. I got a little screen thing going here. You can see here we got the executive order on preventing, I'll zoom in, executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. Now, I will right off the bat let you know that some of these things are really kind of weird coded language that you could read one way or the other, which is the way politics is. You write things so that the right people that you want to read things into it will, and that the other people have the possibility of deniability that you didn't write those things. So first off, you see gender identity or sexual orientation. Okay, we think we know what those are. And just from the beginning, we think that there's sex, as in biological sex, that you have male, female, and then the large minority, but still kind of serious in their own right, is the struggle or even just the identity of those people that are intersex or have specific physical, biological issues that need to be sorted out. But this is talking about identity. And so we have these things where if you think about the thing where you could say, well, she was just a very masculine girl, or she's a tomboy, or he was just a little effeminate. Then you can think along the lines of you're identifying the sex, he, she, that they were a boy or a girl, and that they had certain characteristics. So in some sense, you categorize the element of sex and gender. That what many things are trying to tell you now is that those things are all a social construct, and the reality is I don't know how true that is, but simply by acknowledging that those things exist, that you would say she is a tomboy or he is a bit effeminate, is that you're identifying their sex, and then you're also identifying the gender sort of roles and characteristics that go along with that have run a significant parallel stream throughout history, that we have now decided that they don't do that anymore, and you just choose whatever you want. But let's get into this. So this is Executive Order on Preventing and Combating Discrimination on the Basis of Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation. This is from January 20. By the authority vested in me through the Constitution, the usual thing, Section 1, policy. Every person should be treated with respect and dignity and should be able to live without fear, no matter who they are or whom they love. Oh, okay. I mean, I don't think there's hardly any American that's going to disagree with that. Like, that's a great way to start a sentence. Great way to start this whole thing. But it's also, just go a little further with me. Children, now we say all these things about love, and then it jumps into children right away. Children should be able to learn without worrying whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports. So now no longer do we see the biological sex of someone as the thing that dictates whether they use the men's restroom or the girls' restroom, or there are even some restrooms that are both. I mean, you go to Starbucks or wherever, you go to some schools where they have a single stall door that in some ways, some places call them family bathrooms. But now it's no longer that what you are identified as on your birth certificate, which is a whole nother issue of why people are pushing for the ability to change birth certificates. Your biological sex now is in question, because what used to be your biological sex, and so maybe you were biologically a male, but then people had more feminine characteristics or decided to dress or act in a certain way. Then, because that blurs the line here, so now your bathrooms, your locker rooms are up for grabs because somebody doesn't like what they have on their birth certificate, or the physical parts of their body, the biological things that nature has given them, and for a Christian that God has given them. And you dig a little further, and then it says school sports even. So now... what the order is trying to say is we want everybody to be treated equal. And so sports, basically, this is the struggle is you get further in and there's talk of Title VII and Title IX and all this stuff. But basically what it's doing is it's saying that biological boys can be in girl sports, and biological girls could be in boys sports if they wanted to, because biology doesn't matter. But how you identify matters with what you get to do. And so I could, as a male, biological male, I could decide that I identify as a female and be a wrestler. I mean, this is happening in the world of wrestling and mixed martial arts and some of the more physically combative sports. You would see this maybe in track and field. What would happen? Like, you can see that there are biological physical differences in skeletal muscular systems and the ability to do physical things that we have just gained as a species. And you could even say that God designed it that way from a Christian worldview and perspective, that now that's all coming under scrutiny because of however you identify. Now let's read a little further. Adults should be able to earn a living and pursue a vocation knowing that they will not be fired, demoted, mistreated because of whom they go home to, or because of how they dress does not conform to sex-based stereotypes. Now, most of that reads pretty well, and you would agree to that as an American, that you want everybody to have liberties, and I tend to be a bit more libertarian in my mindset. not full-on crazy libertarian where you just do anything that you want, but the thing that gets me is you get to the end and it's sex-based stereotypes. So now what we used to call sex, as in a boy or a girl, the biology, and that those had gender roles that that ran parallel streams. Now those are nothing more than stereotypes. Those are things that you are now a bigot if you ascribe to them. So you further on in this, the logic will take you to the place where if you would disagree with these things, well then you're not conforming to what they desire here. That if this is one of those things where if you don't dress or do things according to the sex-based stereotypes, which would be pretty natural in the way that most of human history has gone, well then now you're going against this executive order. People should be able to access health care and secure a roof over their heads without being subject to sex discrimination. I don't know how that makes sense. Like, how does healthcare play into the biological nature of a person? Like, they can still get healthcare. I mean, maybe they wouldn't be able to have their gender reassignment surgery in some cases, or specific bodily drugs given to them based on those things that maybe their insurance provider would say no to. It's the same deal. I'm not allowed to just go down to the doctor's office and say, hey, I want some more of that testosterone because I work out and I'm in sports and stuff, and I want to be bigger and stronger. Well, just because I want it doesn't mean that it's good for me or that they should do that. They have rules and things that they base on science, that they base on biology, that they base on the physiology of things going on in research, which we'll get towards the end. Let's see here. All persons should receive equal treatment under the law, no matter their gender identity or sexual orientation. Now, this is one of those blanket statements where you could go, okay, I kind of think that's okay as an American. Maybe I question some of those things within the Christian worldview. But the more that you push into this is totally one of those where it means both things, where it's like, well, I have deniability, but I'm also saying the right things to the right people that want to hear those. Okay, I'm gonna scroll down a little further, past the Title VII, Title IX stuff, and here we go. Discrimination. I'll zoom in a little bit more, maybe. Too much. Discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation manifests differently for different individuals. So people are discriminated against in multiple different ways. Well, yeah, that kind of makes sense, that anybody can be discriminated against in certain sort of ways that are different than somebody else's. But we have to read a little bit further. And it often overlaps with other forms of prohibited discrimination, including discrimination based on the basis of race or disability. So here what we're getting into is the new postmodern idea of intersectionality. Like at the beginning, at the outset, that it's good to see some sort of intersectional place where there is overlapping of things going on in your life, that I can be a man and I can also be a white man, and I can be of German descent or Irish descent, or like my children that are from Jamaica can be Jamaican Americans, which would differentiate them from specifically African-born Americans. But what we see here is the next line. For example, transgender Black Americans face unconscionably high levels of workplace discrimination, homelessness, and violence, including fatal violence. Why? There's nothing that gives any information on how that's true. Like, maybe it is true, but how does that then factor into everything? What they're saying is we want to stand against discrimination based on whatever you choose to be your gender identity, and not necessarily your biological sex, though they don't specifically say biological sex. They hint at it. But with that, then we leave the door open for, you can have these compounding levels of your different levels of oppression. So the more levels of intersectional possible prejudice or discrimination that you have, then you're worse off. Well, maybe that is actually true for some people, and maybe it's not. maybe it's just something that we're attributing in a mental fashion where it's like, well, logically that's there, I guess, if you push it to the utmost conclusion. But how does that really manifest itself? Is there data and studies to say that? I don't know. For the sake of time, let's just keep moving. I'm at like 15, 16 minutes here. The next one, executive order on enabling all qualified Americans to serve their country in uniform. This is from January 25th. By the authority vested in me, blah, 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 blah. The usual Section 1, policy. All Americans who are qualified to serve in the armed forces of the United States, armed forces, should be able to serve. Yes, everyone that's qualified. If you can pass the PT test and all that stuff, I think the person next to you would feel safe with that. The all-volunteer force, as in the military that we have now, because there isn't a draft at this moment, thrives when it is composed of diverse Americans who can meet the rigorous standards for military service. That, yes, any diversity in there is good. When you move a little further, then it says, and an inclusive military strengthens our national security. How? How does that necessarily strengthen our national security? I think that's a good statement to say, but I don't know how that really does. That having a diversity within the military service, I think at one point we looked at and saw that within the idea of ethnicity and race and gender. And now it's no longer gender as in the way that we thought it was. Now that is biological sex. Now gender means something different, that it's basically whatever you choose is how you get to come in, and we have to be inclusive to whatever your choices are. Now, I'm not in the military, so I can't specifically speak, but we'll see a logical progression of irrational logic as we get further in. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one because I want to get to some of the other stuff here. It is my conviction as the Commander-in-Chief, this is President Biden, of the Armed Forces, that gender identity should not be a bar to military service. And I don't know that it has. I think there was, within here, it references previous presidential orders about gender dysphoria. And some of that would be the struggle of asking the question, what about all of the high suicide rates and depression rates of people with gender dysphoria? Well, even after surgery and drugs and all sorts of things, you still see high rates of depression and suicidal tendencies that the world wants to tell you, or at least the more progressive world wants to tell you, that that's everybody else's fault. When the reality is sometimes when you believe a lie and you keep going into it, that's a struggle, at least from a Christian worldview, that as you approach this, okay, moreover, there is a substantial evidence that allowing transgender individuals to serve in the military does not have a meaningful negative impact on the armed forces. To that end, in 2016, a meticulous, comprehensive study requested by the Department of Defense found that enabling transgender individuals to serve openly in the United States military would have only a minimal impact on military readiness and healthcare costs. The study also concluded that open transgender service has no significant impact on operational effectiveness or unit cohesion in foreign military. So not necessarily our military, but some other place. And it would have very minimal impact. Well, what is minimal impact? Minimal impact within the one area even within the budget of the United States is massive. I mean, the level of complexity within the government is pretty huge when it comes to the military and all the different branches. But the point here that I want to make is we want to let qualified Americans serve in uniform. And so it's not just that you're qualified, but it's what you think about yourself too. So in order to maintain some practicality within the military, you have the men's area and the women's area, and some of those areas are blurred when you get into specific combat areas and stuff like that. But here, what it's saying is the executive order says we want everybody qualified to be able to serve. Well, they are. And then it dictates that no, qualified means that we have to be inclusive. And by inclusive, it means that whatever somebody thinks about their gender, what they think, not necessarily what the biology says, dictates what we do then as a nation. Okay, and I'm not pushing one way or another on the transgender agenda of the. I am not trying to say that transgender people don't suffer and don't struggle and don't have depression, and that other people can have those things too. What I am saying is follow the logic in which the presidential orders are going. So the next one, we go from an executive order preventing on gender identity, and then an executive order on enabling all people to be able to be in the military that meet the criteria, regardless of what you want to decide about yourself. So what if you had a person that could pass the test that was younger and decided that they wanted to be a different age? I mean, what if you had people in the military that suddenly think, I don't want to actually do my 20 years. I've decided that I'm going to retire early after not fulfilling all of those, but I should be able to have my pension and all that stuff. I mean, that's a further down logical road, but let's go to the next one. This is from January 22. Statement from the president and vice president on the 48th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. Now, this is specifically a statement and not a presidential order, because there's nothing to order in here, but today marks the 48th anniversary of the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark ruling on Roe versus Wade. In the past 4 years, reproductive health, including the right to choose, has been under relentless and extreme attack. So disagreeing or valuing life, or just from the onset, I'll put my cards on the table here, from a Christian perspective, having the ability to show restraint or to embrace an idea and a lifestyle of abstinence, that those things are not okay, and those are attacking. So even when states try to change these rulings through the actual constitutional means that they are allowed to do, is the whole reason that this case actually came through. So having cases that would pursue reversing Roe versus Wade, which would then just revert things back to the states deciding what they do, they're saying that those are relentless and extreme attacks. So if you don't agree with a pro-choice, which really isn't a pro-choice, because you do have a choice to begin with, you have a choice to not do things. And I'm not talking about situations of rape and incest and all of that. I'm talking about just as a blanket statement here. Those things are attacking. You are attacking the other perspective. Now, I think it's good to have discourse. I think it's good to sometimes get heated. I think it's good to have discussion and dialogue. But what this is saying is that if you don't agree with us, then you are an attacker. Be savvy to this language, because this will come out as we move further into administrative stuff and with the media, that you will hear things like domestic terrorism and the labels that are assigned to that. Okay, let's go further. We are deeply committed to making sure everyone has access to care. Now, is this about Roe versus Wade, or is this something about health care? Let's look. We're make sure everybody has access to care, including reproductive health care, So it's about care, and then we do care about health care for reproductive things, regardless of income, race, zip code, health insurance status, or immigration status. Now, there's a whole different ball of worms that you could get into within each and every one of those things and what they kind of mean, but let's just go a little further. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to codifying Roe versus Wade and appointing judges. I'll get to the judges in a second. Codifying. So I didn't really know what this meant, and I am not a lawyer, nor have I been to law school. But from my understanding is that it takes it out of the world of a court ruling and makes it part of the law, makes it part of the legislative side. And so once it's within that, then it's a law that can be changed, but it would take more votes and more people and more time to change it. because within the world of the Supreme Court, anything the Supreme Court rules on, they could then rule later and make a different decision based on things that they have in front of them. What this is trying to do is say, no, you can't go back and reverse it. It would take a different means rather than the Supreme Court, because the struggle that is in place is President Trump and some before him appointed more conservative judges. Now, most of these judges tend to be conservative towards the line that they believe in constitutionality over specific just precedent. And so looking at the Constitution and saying, what did they intend when they wrote that, and how does that apply now, rather than, and here's where your part gets a little further. So we're committed to codifying Roe versus Wade and appointing judges that respect foundational precedents like Roe. We want them to respect precedent, which almost every judge, I think, does. But what they're saying here that they're not saying, this is one of those backwards kind of both way statements, is what we're not saying is constitutionality, that it's not about the Constitution, it's about the precedent more so. We are also committed to ensuring that we work to eliminate maternal and infant health disparities. I have no idea what they mean by that. I'm really not sure, because now they're getting into, is this one of those things where we're committed to, once children are born, that we don't want to have disparities, because now this is infant language and they're not acknowledging life in the womb. Even though Roe versus Wade does do that after viability, like 20 some weeks. I can't remember the specifics. Roe versus Wade is about having privacy and not about life. And so there is actually a side-by-side parallel judgment, I think, that the Supreme Court handed down that was supposed to go with it. I don't remember the intricacies of that right now, but let's go a little further. We want to eliminate maternal and infant health disparities, increase access to contraceptive, and support families economically so that all parents can raise their family with dignity. This commitment extends to our critical work on health outcomes around the world. Okay, so now what we're getting into is, not once do they say, hey, maybe you can make better decisions in how you approach your life. That's kind of what we do within the church, is we say, hey, we believe in Jesus and we're a part of this community. And then, like the book of 1 John says, and then we live into the commandments and we live according to a specific worldview. Well, not the whole world lives into that, and that's very obvious. And the Bible says that they won't. But what this is saying is never mind what you decide to do. We want to make sure that we're committed so that we can have contraception, so you can do whatever you want. And I'm not saying contraception is bad. That has really helped a number of areas of life for families. And I am not pro-life all the way to contraception like some Catholics are. And support families economically. So now Roe versus Wade is about making sure that people have money for the choices that they made, which means that you and I, from a practical standpoint as Americans, those of us that pay taxes, should pay money to people that didn't choose options that we chose, or the option of, we want to make it economically okay for you to have an abortion. We want to help pay for your abortion or fund Planned Parenthood clinics from the aspect of tax dollars. I mean, that's the way that I would read that, but these are all statements that can be read in both directions. And that would give you dignity. Sometimes living to a certain ethic gives you dignity. And then a bigger thing is the whole aspect of this. This extends our commitment to critical work on healthcare outcomes around the world. Not the opportunity to have healthcare, but the outcome of that healthcare, that it should be worldwide, a specific outcome, a thing that is dictated by the end and not by the opportunity that you have. Okay, let's keep going. I got one more here that we're going to jump into. This is the memorandum on restoring trust in the government through scientific integrity and evidence-based policymaking. Now, I'm going to assume from the onset that most of this is directed towards the COVID conversation and climate change and some of those kind of agendas that are kind of hot buttons right now with jumping back into the Paris Accord, and probably not so much about the three previous statements that we just read from them. So let's dig in just a little bit here. Memorandum for the heads of the executive departments of the agencies. So this is a policy going out to the people that are of the agencies, and at the very end it dictates all these different things. But it is the policy of my administration to make evidence-based decisions guided by the best available science and data. That's great. I love that. Scientific and technological information, data, and evidence are central to the development and iterative improvement of sound policies and to the delivery of equitable programs. That's for another topic. Across every area of government, scientific findings should never be distorted or influenced by political considerations. Do you think that that's happening? Do you think that that's happening? I mean, you can see that right now with the struggle with COVID and schools and teachers' unions. And let's just keep going here. When scientific or technological information is considered in policy decisions, it should be subjected to well-established scientific processes, including peer review where feasible and appropriate, with appropriate protections for privacy. Like, all of these things are totally agreeable. Improper political interference from the work of federal scientists or from other scientists who support the work of the federal government. Now, here's where things are getting kind of dicey. And in communication with the scientific facts, undermines the welfare of the nation, contributes to the systemic inequities and injustices, and violates the trust that the public places in the government to best serve its collective interests. Now, there's more to go down, but here's a few things to highlight. It says, you need to be based in science. We really want you to be based in science. We really need to be a community that is looking at facts and evidence and peer review and study, and all of those things are great things. Those are a modern mindset, that we need to look at things through a practical lens within the mindset that things need to be falsifiable, things need to be tested, and yet the three things we read previous was that science according to biology and gender doesn't really exist anymore, even though we should take it very seriously, that we need to be unified around that. Now just pause for a second. We went from an executive order that talked about combating discrimination based on the gender that you choose as your identity, that all Americans should be able to serve regardless of what gender that they choose within the armed forces, and that a woman's right to choose, even though the question of what a woman is intricately implied in a strange way within the first two orders, that if gender is just a social construct and it doesn't matter, then eventually none of us are male or female. We're just people. And you're seeing some of this language. So how does it benefit women and all of the struggles that they've been through, or even the movement of feminism in its good forms, where it asks questions of trying to fight for equality and things, if there's no such thing as that as a woman anymore? Now it's just whatever you pick. And then we get to the memorandum that says, and we should trust science. I think we should. But then you get towards the end and it says improper political interference in the work of federal scientists or other scientists who support the work of the federal government and in communication of scientific facts undermines the welfare of the nation. So if you disagree with who the government has in those scientific places, regardless of whether they were the best qualified or most qualified person, then you are undermining the welfare of the nation. I thought the welfare of the nation was best when people could actually have conversations and discuss things moving forward, that one side has scientific facts and the other one analyzes those things. That is the point of peer review. It's only peer review if it is the government's peers, is what I'm reading here. Now, this is coded language like everybody has when you read political things. But then you get a little further. So it undermines the welfare of the nation to question the scientific elements of things, even if you are a PhD, MD in all sorts of areas. If you go against the grain, then you're undermining the nation. And you contribute to systemic inequities and injustices. So now you get into the area of questioning any sort of scientific finding within the government, even if you have those PhDs, MDs. You are now within the realm of discrimination, within the realm of prejudice, within the realm of hate speech and microaggressions and all of these different things, because they contribute to scientific or systemic inequities. And maybe on a different time we'll talk about the difference between systematic and systemic, because there is a big difference there. But you contribute to the injustices and the inequities. So by having a different opinion, which you're not allowed to have, you make the world a worse place because you disagree. I don't know about that. I prefer to have us in a place that follows within the Constitution, that I have the right to practice my religion and believe things as long as they don't affect everybody else in some ways. Like, I can't be a jihadist and claim that was my religious right. Now this is trying to say something different. This is trying to say, welcome to the carnival that is the new political scientific atmosphere, that everything you thought was there isn't really there anymore, that gender is completely whatever you want it to be. At the same time, we need to back the science. Now, we need to back the science when it actually contributes to the areas that we like. So maybe if this is towards climate change and policies for that, well, then we back those scientists. Well, what about ones that disagree with us? Well, they're adding to inequities and injustices. Okay, well, what about the sciences that say biology has a role to play in what your gender is? Biology has a role to play in where life begins. Those things shouldn't really... I mean, you can see the mental hula hoops and things that you have to jump through to make this actually kind of... I don't know how any of this fits together, really. But let's shore up the question then of, so how does all this matter when it gets to you and me from the Christian worldview, the practice of saying, Jesus, I want to follow after you, and I want to live within your church and your body and be a part of the world around me and benefit my community and my neighbors and all of this stuff. Well, here's why it matters. And let me jump in here. We'll just go to Genesis 1. Genesis 1, 127. So God has created some things, and then he gets to the sixth day. And so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So now, latent within who we are is the image of God. I think Calvin calls this the sensus divinitatis, that there is this divine sense, this divine stamp within each and every one of us that bears the image of God, even in our differences, even as men and as women, as male and as female, that those things manifest God's image. And what we're told is that no longer exists. Now, if that no longer exists, and you begin to believe that from a worldview standpoint, and you take that worldview and apply it into the way that you read theological things, then suddenly what you're saying is thousands of years of theological perspective are now gone. that those things don't matter. And how you interpret the rest of the Bible then becomes subjective. Now you can be able to look at, well, so then what are specific roles within the Bible for men and women? There are some things in there that the Bible specifically talks about in the ways that we should react to each other and relate to each other, not react to each other, relate to each other and interact with each other. That those don't matter. And eventually, I mean, you take this a little bit further, and we have things like honor your father and mother. Well, it doesn't matter if there's no such thing as a father and a mother. You just have people that gave you biological entities. You just have two people that contributed an X or a Y to your genetic makeup, and they're not really there, so you don't have to honor anything. I mean, this looks at the struggle within marriage. This looks at a struggle within leadership in the church. This points at the very nature of who Jesus was. That we look back at Jesus and say, no, he was a man. Well, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, because gender identity doesn't really matter. And maybe you could say, well, he identified as a man, but maybe he really wasn't. I mean, some of this stuff is really going to get pushed out, and you will see this approach if you have a Christian mindset, if you have a Christian worldview, if you approach the text and you say, God, shape my life and my thinking based on these things, and then you go out into the school system or something where that's not okay, then who wins? Your right to religious freedom, or the scientific community backed by the government, who anybody that disagrees with them is now responsible for injustices and inequities? This is a really slippery slope that we're on. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am being pretty pragmatic here when it comes to things of within a political atmosphere that says we need to trust science, but at the same time, science doesn't exist when it applies to areas that we don't want it to exist, is the same place, same people that will then turn around and say, your religious rights aren't really rights anymore. That's not really what they intended. It gets a little dicey. It gets a little crazy. And these are things that I think we need to keep our eyes open to. We need to be focusing on beyond just kind of, well, maybe I like who the president is, maybe I like the new administration, maybe I don't like the administration. These things will have lasting impacts as we move forward as a nation and for the people within the church, that we as Christians, you either identify within a specific group where maybe you're like me, you tend to be far more conservative and let the Bible speak authoritatively, and your hermeneutic tends to side with more of a traditional historical perspective rather than one that approaches things from a more progressive mindset, where the struggle there really is idolatry. That in a progressive mindset, you place yourself in the seat of God's place, that you say, I'll take the seat of judgment and decide what is or isn't applicable within my life. That the more that we push on this, the more struggle we're going to see within the church. The more that we're going to see that we need to be more savvy on how we make decisions and the wordings. And we already see this within who's allowed to use our building and who's not allowed to use our building, so that we can maintain some sort of civil neutrality when it comes to the government and our religious freedoms. I talked a really long time. I think that's enough for today. We have climbed a little bit up the labyrinth and through some of its interweaving craziness. But that was hopefully a little bit of an enlightening experience for you, that you get to see that not everything that you read out there really makes sense when you actually dig in. So until next time, I actually think next time I'm going to do a breakdown after this Sunday, maybe on some stuff from the book of 1 John, as we've kind of navigated. For those of you that are in the church with me here at FRC or watch online or any of those things, that we'll get into some more theological questions over maybe atonement and maybe even a little bit of Antichrist talk and what that really means. So yeah. See you next time as we climb the labyrinth.